All right, so we have looked generally at program music and the different types of works that could fall within that category. Let's take a look now at one example of a tone poem. Remember that a tone poem is a single movement piece that generally has some sort of association with literature or maybe historical events or even landscape. And that's what we're going to look at with the piece that we're going to explore here. Imagine wherever it is you live. Hopefully there's some rivers near you. Maybe you live in the desert and you don't have any rivers. Then you can imagine your own landscape that's appropriate. Think about if you had to write a piece of music to describe your landscape, what would it sound like? I'm here in the mountains of East Tennessee, where we have lots of rivers, we have these beautiful mountains, and I could easily create a piece, if I were a composer, where I could start maybe at the spring in the mountain where my river starts, and illustrate musically how that stream goes down the mountain, how it gathers speed as it goes down the hill, how eventually it comes out and joins into the Holston River, which is the big river that runs around our area, and how it broadens out. And if I knew my river really well, I could talk about the things that happen on the side of the river or things you might encounter. You know, if you were in Pennsylvania around the Erie Canal, that area, you might be able to incorporate things that would sound like all the barge traffic that's on the river. So you get the idea. We're just trying to paint an aural picture of something that's visual in this case. So the composer that we're going to look at here is a Slovakian composer named Bedrich Smetana. That part of the world keeps changing the country line, so we'll just say he was Bohemian because that sort of covers that area very well. He wrote a set of 6 tone poems that he called My Country. So he's made it very clear that that's what he's writing about. This is something that's very personal to him. This is particularly romantic in nature. This is a good example of what we call nationalism. Nationalism. What happens in nationalism is that you choose content, and that if that doesn't matter if you're painting or you're writing novels or you're writing plays or you're writing music, whatever it is you do that's artistic, you take content that is related to your own particular country. So as an American, I might choose to write a piece of music about Daniel Boone, Paul Bunyan, Yellowstone. I could take any of those things. They're all uniquely American, and I could write music that relates to that. So a composer who's a nationalist composer chooses things from their own culture. In music, what generally happens is that they will even use music from their own culture. So they might take folk songs that everybody would recognize as being, in Smetana's case, Bohemian, and incorporate those into the piece of music. And then it's like putting up a big flag for everybody who's Bohemian saying, hey, look, this is a piece about my country. As we'll see when we look at American composer Charles Ives, he did the same sort of thing using American tunes in the 20th century. So Smetana has written a set of 6 tone poems, and the most famous of those is called the Moldau, which is a river that runs through the country. So we're going to go now and listen to this piece, which is fairly lengthy. Tone poems are long. They've got a lot to tell us. Long river we've got to cover here. So we'll sort of do segment by segment. I'll have you watch some of it, and then you can come back and we'll talk about that, and we'll sort of progress that way. So the movement starts out at that spring where the river rises out of the rock. So what's it like? What's the sound of a spring? Sort of bubbly, right? You get those sorts of sounds. There's some sort of stereotypical things that composers tend to do that suggest certain sound things to us. And anytime that we want watery sorts of sounds in music, one of the ways it's often done is to take instruments like the flute, violin, things that are sort of high-pitched, and do a sort of that sort of sound that sort of sounds gurgly. So you can create that sound of the water running. So he's going to start us very simply with some flutes and other woodwinds, making this sort of ripply sound to get us into the idea that this water is coming out of the ground. And as the piece goes along, we add more and more instruments as the water grows until we get to our full river a little bit down the way. So now go and start the Moldau and listen to how he gets that river started out of the mountain. All right, so now you've seen that he's piled more and more instruments. Our river is now a river. It's not just a little bubbling stream. So we're going down the river, and it's flowing through the woods. So what's happening in the woods on either side? There's a hunt going on. So when we think hunting, people on horses chasing foxes, that sort of thing, what instrument comes to mind? If you've watched enough movies and heard enough things, you think horns, particularly French horns. Whatever kind of calls you want to make for that. The horn sound is very much associated with the hunt. So that's what Smetana uses here to let us know that the hunt is going on the side. So we still have those little undercurrents of our river, because after all, we are still on the river. But now we know that there's action here on the side. We've got a hunt happening on the side. Things get a little dramatic. You can imagine people rushing through the woods and chasing their prey. So now go listen to the hunting part of this particular piece. All right, so now we've passed our hunting scene. And just in real life, if you were floating down the river, it's not like the hunting scene would go, boom, it's gone. It sort of fades out. While we move on, we hear the sound of the hunt behind us now. It's no longer in the forefront of our aural vision. So we're going down the river. The next thing that we encounter is a little village. And in this village, they're having a wedding. So we're now going to hear the sounds of a wedding party on the banks. But this is not a big formal wedding, big church. This is a peasant wedding. So we're going to hear music that sounds like Bohemian folk songs. So it has that same quality that you might have seen if you've watched any kinds of folk dancers from Eastern Europe. It's going to be sort of light and lively. The tonal organization, which you don't really have to completely understand, but it uses a different kind of tonal system than our major minor scales to create the particular sound that we think of as Eastern European. So listen as we now join our wedding party on the banks of the Moldau. All right, so now we've left our wedding party behind. Everybody's still having a good time, but our boat's still floating down the river. We must move on. Now it's starting to be nightfall. At this point, Smetana kind of gets a little creative, we'll say. So he calls this part of the river journey Nymphs in the Moonlight. Now, I'm pretty sure there weren't any nymphs on the river, even in Smetana's time. But what he's trying to create here is a feeling. So if you imagine that you're on a boat in the river, maybe the moon is full and the moonlight is sparkling off the water. What kinds of sounds would you make to create that? Are we going to have our big booming horns playing here? Probably not. Smetana liked this section. It's a little bit longer than some of the other ones, but the night is long as well. So now go and listen to the Nymphs in the Moonlight part of this piece. All right, so now we've come out of the night. We floated nice and peacefully down our nymph-laden river, and now the sun is coming up. Those stereotypical things that we talk about, sunrises are one of those sort of stereotypical things. So you will generally hear an increase in the dynamic level because the nights are supposed to be a little bit quiet. As the sun comes up and things start getting busy, the dynamic level will increase. It's not unusual to have more high-pitched instruments coming in, sort of building up to the brightness of the day. So you might listen for that as the sun rises on our Moldau River. So now we're in the river still. There is a point in the river where they encounter rapids. So here's his chance to really have high drama. So our little boat, however big it happens to be, is now being tossed and turned and bumping off the rocks, and there's water splashing everywhere, and maybe some people, screaming in terror. All the things that might happen in the rapids. So now we get to see how Smetana takes our orchestra and creates this sound of crashing water and rocks. Not unusual in this kind of setting for composers to do things like cymbal crashes, because you can make a big splashy sort of sound that would sound like a big wave hitting something. You'll hear a lot of really high piccolo in here because it creates so much tension. I mean, this is a scary part of the ride for our people on our boat. So now go and listen to the rapids part of the Moldau. All right, we survived our rapids now. The river's back to its calming thing. We hear our theme that we've been hearing throughout the piece in various permutations, depending on what the river's doing at the time. We're almost to the end of our journey. At the end of our trip, we're going to come between these big cliffs, and up on the top is a big castle. And that's the end of our journey for this piece. So how are we going to represent a big castle musically? It's been done a lot. The Great Gate of Kiev, which is not a castle, but it's still a big, massive stone thing. What do we think? Big brass things. Anything that sounds powerful and majestic is going to be a good choice for our big castle scene. So now go back to recording, get through the castle, and then we'll be sailing off at the end of the Moldau River.